Judge, the people called Jaden Jarmel-Schneider.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony that you are going to give before this court and jury shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Do you so swear or affirm?
I do.
Have a seat. State your full name for the record, spelling your last name.
Jaden Jarmel-Schneider. Jarmel-Schneider.
County of residence?
New York County.
Good afternoon. You may inquire.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Schneider. Where do you work?
I work at the New York County District Attorney's Office.
How long have you worked there?
Coming up on 2 years.
And what is your current position there?
I am a paralegal.
What are some of the things that you do as a paralegal at the DA's office?
It really runs the gamut. But in general, we help the attorneys, sending out subpoenas and kind of organizing and analyzing whatever records we receive in response.
In your work as a paralegal at the District Attorney's Office, were you assigned to an investigation involving Donald Trump?
Yes.
As part of your role in that investigation, were you tasked with analyzing phone records pertaining to the case?
Yes.
Was it phone records and also other kinds of records?
Yes.
Did the phone records include the AT&T records that are contained in what was admitted earlier today in People's Exhibit 400?
Yes.
Did it also include the Verizon records that were admitted into evidence earlier today as People's Exhibit 401?
Yes.
Can you tell us generally what is contained within those phone records?
So we generally get 2 kinds of records. Subscriber records review basic information about the user associated with the phone record. Call detail records, which are kind of a log of all the incoming and outgoing calls associated with whatever number was subpoenaed.
What format are the phone records in when you get them?
Depends on the phone carrier. So for AT&T, we got them as PDF text files, image files. For Verizon, we get them as Excel spreadsheets and Word documents and PDF.
In your work reviewing various phone records, did you also review information contained in data extractions from Michael Cohen's phones?
Yes.
What did you review?
I reviewed Celebrite Reports, which is the application used to review the data that is extracted on call logs, contact lists, calendar invites, various pieces of metadata, etc.
Did that include what is in evidence? Contact information from those phones that is in evidence currently as People's 263 and 264?
Yes.
Did it include text messages that are in evidence as People's 249 through 251, 255 through 260 and 262?
Yes.
Did it include call logs that are in evidence as People's 261?
Yes.
Did you review subscriber information contained in People's 400 and 401?
Yes.
Did you also review a contact list contained in People's 69B in evidence?
I did.
In your work on the investigation, did you prepare a summary report, several summary reports, or withdrawn? Let me rephrase that. In your work on the investigation, did you prepare a summary report of contact information?
I did.
What information did you rely on in making that report?
So I looked at the subscriber records that I mentioned from AT&T and Verizon. I also looked at other pieces of documentary records, text messages, records, email signatures, contact lists produced by the Trump Organization. I also looked at the contact lists that were extracted from Mr. Cohen's cell phones.
What was the purpose of creating this report?
We wanted to give the jury a sense of how we figured out which phone numbers were associated with which people. Kind of where the phone numbers would show up in the evidence that we ultimately used.
Are the records that you relied on in making this chart all in evidence in this case?
Yes.
If we can pull up for the court and parties and the witness but not the jury, what's been marked as People's 416 for identification. Do you recognize what that is?
Yes.
What is it?
This is the phone key I was just talking about.
You created this?
I did.
Are there redactions in this chart?
Yes.
What is redacted?
The first 6 digits of all the phone numbers.
Other than that, is this an exact copy of the key that you created?
Yes.
At this time, I would offer People's 416 into evidence.
No objection.
416 is accepted into evidence.
If we can display that to the jury, can you walk us through what we're looking at?
Sure. So in the right column under the heading Exhibit, it shows what the source document was and what exhibit number it came from. In the left column called Phone Number, it is the phone number, and the next column is the name as it appears on the source document on the exhibit. Under the source column, it's just the kind of record: email, text, contact list, etc.
For some of the rows, there is one name associated with a number, but then there are multiple sources. Why is that?
A lot of the phone numbers we saw in several different places. So we put various documents that we found them on just to corroborate that the phone number did belong to the person that is listed next to them.
Okay, we can take that down. I now want to talk about another part of the work that you did with the phone records here. Did you create a number of summaries of phone records?
Yes.
What was contained in those summaries?
These are just logs of phone calls between pairs of people.
You mentioned that you received the records that we just discussed earlier in a number of file formats, particularly the records now in People's 400 and 401 from AT&T and Verizon. Starting with the AT&T records, how did you go about putting data in the summary?
We have a software that reads through the text files, the AT&T files. It allows us to file and sort by phone number, date, caller, etc. We uploaded the text files, filtered and sorted and formatted them to look pretty.
What did you do with the Verizon records?
So the Verizon records were a particular year. They came in as a PDF. We made them text readable, uploaded the text into Excel, wrote simple scripts to extract the information that was put into a format that was file readable. Then we just filtered again by date and time, caller phone number, etc., then formatted them.
In addition to what's in evidence as People's 400 and 401, did you include any other records in the call summaries?
Yes.
Do you recall what date?
In some cases, we put calls that were taken off of the call log that is in evidence as 261, which is calls pulled from Mr. Cohen's phone.
What was the purpose of creating these summaries?
So as you might have seen, the phone records are somewhat hard to decipher. They don't list which caller is associated with the phone number. They're all different time zones, and kind of more importantly, they include a lot of extraneous outside calls of people that are not relevant. We wanted to create summaries that were a bit more digestible and easy, and by time zone.
You mentioned different time zones. How did you standardize the records for the time zones?
So it differed between AT&T and Verizon. For AT&T, all the time zones were in UTC. We were able to mass convert them to Eastern Standard Time. We accounted for daylight savings time. For Verizon, the time zone depended on the location they were in when they made or received the call. We went through and determined the location, which was listed on the call detail records, and converted them to all New York time, which is to say, we standardized everything to New York time.
Now, are the summaries of the phone records based solely on the information contained in exhibits already in evidence?
Yes.
And are those the exhibits we already discussed?
Yes.
In preparing the summaries of the phone records, did you ensure that the information you were including in the summaries fairly and accurately reflected the information in the exhibits in evidence?
Yes.
How did you do that?
So after we made the summaries, we went through line by line and compared to the underlying call detail record.
Have you reviewed what's been marked previously as People's 337 through 342 and 344 through 349 for identification?
Yes.
And is People's 337 calls between Michael Cohen and Keith Davidson?
Yes.
Is People's 338 calls between Michael Cohen and Hicks?
Yes.
Is People's 339 calls between Michael Cohen and Dylan Howard?
Yes.
Is People's 340 calls between Michael Cohen and David Pecker?
Yes.
Is People's 341 calls between Michael Cohen and Keith Schiller?
Yes.
Is People's 342 calls between Michael Cohen and Alan Weisselberg?
Yes.
Is People's 344 calls between Keith Davidson and Gina Rodriguez?
Yes.
Is People's 345 calls between Dylan Howard and Keith Davidson?
Yes.
Is People's 346 calls between Dylan Howard and David Pecker?
Yes.
Is People's 347 calls between Dylan Howard and Gina Rodriguez?
Yes.
Is People's 348 calls between the Trump Organization and Michael Cohen?
Yes.
Is People's 349 calls between the defendant and Michael Cohen?
Yes.
And are those the phone summaries that you created?
Yes.
At this time, I offer People's 337 through 342 and 344 through 349 into evidence.
No objection.
337 through 342 and 344 through 349 are received into evidence.
Thank you. If we can pull up what's in evidence as People's 342 for everybody. And if you could, again, sort of explain to us about what the different columns are and what we're seeing. Is this a representative example of one of the summaries that you created?
Somewhat short one, but yes.
But basically, they all look the same. Some may be longer?
Yes.
Is this call between Michael Cohen and Alan Weisselberg?
Yes.
Do we see that on the top left of the chart?
Yes.
We saw some redactions. What is redacted in these charts?
The first 6 digits of every phone number.
What are the numbers next to Michael Cohen and the name Alan Weisselberg?
Michael Cohen has 0114, and Alan Weisselberg has 7,224 and 4,509.
Can you walk us through what this chart demonstrates?
So the left column is the date and time in Eastern Time. The second column is the date and time in UTC, which is how it was originally recorded in the AT&T records. The time column tells whether the call is a text or voicemail. The from tells you who the call is from, the phone number, and the to column tells you who the call is to. The duration is how long the call was, the minutes. The source column tells you which phone carrier or where we got the records from.
Thank you. And again, I am not going to walk through all of the exhibits we admitted. Do they all have the same format?
Yes.
Thank you. You can take that down. Could we now pull up what is in evidence as People's 247? Do you recognize what this is?
I do.
What is it?
This is a Celebrate report showing the metadata associated with the recording that was extracted from Michael Cohen's phone.
Can you see on this report the approximate time that the recording ended?
Not exactly, but you can figure it out. The timestamp the recording is 10:56 and 42 seconds a.m. in New York time, and the duration of the recording is 2 minutes and 51 seconds. If you add them together, the recording ended at 10:59 and about 30 seconds a.m. in New York City time.
Okay, we can take that down. Did you also review the call records already in evidence as People's 400 and 401?
I did.
Did you review records relating to the phone ending in 114?
Yes.
Who did that phone number belong to?
Michael Cohen.
Did you identify incoming calls to that phone number that began at approximately the same time as the recording ended?
Yes.
Could we pull up from People's 400 the page Bates number Danny ID DJ 00002726, which is redacted to be displayed? What line number is that call on this report?
It's line 61266192.
And what was the connection time on that call?
This is 2:59 and 53 seconds in UTC time. At that time of year, that would have been at 10:59 and 53 seconds New York City time.
How long was the seizure time on this call?
23 seconds.
And what is the time of this call in relation to when the recording ended that we just looked at on People's 247?
So the recording ended at 10:59 and about 30 seconds a.m. Eastern time. So this call was connected about 23 seconds later.
Thank you. We can pull that down. Now, can we pull up just for the parties and the witness and the judge what has been marked as People's 350 for identification? Do you recognize this?
I do.
What is this?
This is a summary chart of what's in evidence as People's Exhibits 1 through 34.
Did you review and confirm People 350 for identification?
I did.
Can you describe how you did that?
So I looked at the chart, and I went back to each exhibit that it references and cross-referenced to make sure everything was accurately reflected.
What kinds of documents are People's 1 through 34?
They are invoices, vouchers from the Trump Organization's multi-data system, and checks.
I do have an objection if we can go to sidebar.
Whereupon proceedings were held at sidebar.
Judge, our objection is to the text on the bottom right, false business records or something like to that effect. Some things popped up on the screen. Has it been modified?
No.
They're doing it advanced. They're anticipating my objection.
You said your objection.
Judge, this is unduly argumentative.
This is a summary of the 34 business records, and essentially, it's to assist the jury in associating the specific business records with counts. We have no problem with some kind of instruction to the jury that the title is not in evidence, but these are records that we're alleging are business records.
What is the purpose for introducing it into evidence now? You can probably do it on summation. You can do it in summation. I think it would be perfectly appropriate at that time.
So could we. I'm just trying to think how we can modify it. Can we call it alleged false business records?
There is a title. It says the counts. I think if you can keep the text on the top, just redact the title on the bottom, just get the summary in.
You have it. I think for summation you won't have an argument, okay?
Okay.
Whereupon the following proceedings were held in open court.
Mr. Bove, we resolved your objection as discussed at the bench.
Thank you, Judge.
If we can. When you are ready, display just for the parties, the court, and the witness the summary chart again. Judge, at this time, the people offer People's 350 for identification into evidence.
As modified, no objection.
Subject to redaction.
If we can display that for everybody. Can you just walk us through again, first of all, what is this summarizing?
This is summarizing People's Exhibits 1 through 34 evidence.
And are there 3 different rows?
Yes.
Can you tell us what each row indicates?
The top row are invoices, the middle row are vouchers, and the bottom row are the checks.
And then are there columns by month?
Yes.
Starting with the invoices, is there only one invoice for the months of January and February?
Yes.
And below that, for January and February, are there 2 vouchers?
Yes.
What information is included in this chart vouchers?
The dollar amount of the voucher entry in some of the months, and all of the months the number associated with the voucher entry.
Just going back up to the invoice, what information is included in the invoice row?
The date of the invoice and the dollar amount requested on the invoice.
And then below those 2 things, there is something called count number. What is that?
Each of these exhibits is associated with a count in the indictment. So the red count number corresponds to that count.
And if we could just continue going down January and February, those 2 columns, we talked about the 1 invoice, 2 vouchers. And is there only 1 check?
Yes.
How many invoices were there in total on this chart?
11.
And can you just read which counts they're associated with?
Counts 1, 5, 8, 11, 14, 17, 20, 23, 26, 29, and 32.
After January and February, is there 1 invoice for each month for the rest of the year?
Yes.
Going down to vouchers, same question. Could you just read the count number for each of the vouchers?
Sure. Counts 2, 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, 21, 24, 27, 30, and 33.
And is there 1 voucher for every month in 2017?
Yes.
And finally, in checks, could you read the count number for each check?
Sure. It's counts 4, 7, 10, 13, 16, 19, 22, 25, 28, 31, and 34.
And after January and February, is there 1 check for each of the remaining months in 2017?
Yes.
And if we look at the column all the way on the right where there are just 3 blue boxes, can you tell us what those are?
It's just tallying up the number of each category of record.
And then at the bottom where it says business records?
This is the total number of business records.
Is that also the total number of counts in the indictment?
Yes.
I have nothing further.
Mr. Bove, please.
Thank you, Judge. May I inquire?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Schneider or Mr. Jarmel-Schneider?
Whichever is easier for you.
What's your preference?
Jarmel-Schneider, thank you.
Mr. Jarmel-Schneider, you testified about some call summary charts, right?
Yes.
That sounded like a lot of work.
Yes.
At times, arguably tedious work.
Could be.
The tolling.
Honestly, I kind of enjoyed it.
I hear that. Respect.
Laughter from the audience.
A lot of that work had to take place before the trial, right?
All of it.
Because you've been sitting over here the whole trial, correct?
Yes.
So you know that there were summaries that were sort of finalized from a quality control perspective from your standpoint and then produced to President Trump before the trial, right?
What do you mean?
Versions of those charts that were marked as exhibits, produced and marked as exhibits, were produced to the defense before the trial, right?
Yes.
Those are the ones that passed muster from your perspective?
I would like to think they all did.
Right, the ones that were produced before the trial?
Yes.
Just so we're clear, the ones that are in evidence now are not actually summaries of every toll between the participants on the chart, right?
No, that would be tens of hundreds of thousands of calls.
Just as an example, going to Exhibit 337 is a call summary chart, calls between Michael Cohen and Keith Davidson.
Yes.
And the one that's admitted in evidence is not a summary of every toll that you have between those 2 individuals, right?
Right. We narrowed down by a time period.
So there were some deletions from the charts made this week, right?
I guess so.
When you say narrowed down, some things were cut?
Yes.
And so for Mr. Cohen and Mr. Davidson, there's about 1.5 pages of calls cut from 2018, right?
I don't know from the top of my head.
Let me think about the best way to do this. I want to show you what's been marked for identification as Defense P1. Mr. Bernick, this is just for the parties, the court, and the witness. If we could flip to the page that has Government Exhibit 337. You see that?
Yes.
If you can hold on 1 second, I think we're having technical difficulty.
Whereupon the defense confers.
This is the government's exhibit list, right? You recognize that?
This is some version of it, yes.
Can we take a look at the first page, please? You see it's dated April 16th, 2024?
Yes.
That's right after the trial started, right?
Yes.
If we can go back to the part that reflects Exhibits 336 and 337, there's Bates ranges in the far right column, right?
Yes.
Those are basically the page numbers that were on this exhibit when it was given to the defense, right?
Yes.
Do you have a hard copy of 336 up there?
I do not.
Can I trouble the government for a hard copy of 337?
Whereupon the people give documents to Mr. Bove, who then gives the document to the court officer to give to the witness, and the witness reviews the document.
People's Exhibit 337 has Bates numbers, and I'll use it to compare. Just a few pages, right?
That's right.
Because some pages were deleted, right?
Yes.
And they're from 2018, correct?
Yes.
And you were here during the cross-examination of Keith Davidson, right?
I was.
And you were here when the defense admitted recordings of conversations between Keith Davidson and Michael Cohen, right?
I was.
And then a subsequent decision was made to delete toll records from the summary chart in 2018?
No, I don't think that's correct.
You don't think that time sequence is correct?
I think the time sequence is correct.
I'm not going to ask you about the purpose. I'm just asking about the time sequence. You were here early this morning when there were some text messages read between Dylan Howard and Gina Rodriguez, right?
Yes.
You admitted a call summary marked Government Exhibit 344 of marked call records of Keith Davidson and Gina Rodriguez, right?
Yes.
That's another exhibit where, this week, a significant number of calls were removed, right?
I don't know about significant, but they were shortened.
3 pages worth?
I don't know off the top of my head.
Mr. Conroy, do you have a copy of 344?
I need the Bates number. Who is it between?
Rodriguez and Davidson.
4,269. Just to try to move along, you remember deleting several pages from 344, correct?
Yes.
Now, you also testified about some call summaries relating to Michael Cohen, correct?
Correct.
And one of the phone numbers that you looked at with respect to Michael Cohen ended in 0144, right?
0114.
That's the attention to detail I was talking about. Thank you. So that's a number that you had to get familiar with because it cut across a bunch of these charts, right?
Yes.
You testified that you also familiarized yourself with the electronic phone evidence that's been presented here at the trial, correct?
Yes.
And that came in through Mr. Dowse, right?
Correct.
And he testified about the contents of 2 cell phones, right?
Yes.
He called them CP1 and CP2. Do you remember that?
Yes.
CPL was associated with the phone number 0114 was his testimony, right?
That's correct.
And you looked at those, the data extracted from those phones to help prepare the summaries, right?
Yes.
Do you recall what that IMEI number was associated with? You can say no with CP1.
It's like a 20-digit code, I don't know.
If we could bring up for the witness, the parties, and the court defense exhibit G10. Go to page 3, please. Do you see it says IMEI labeled at the bottom? It ends in 997431, correct?
Correct.
So that's the IMEI associated with the device Mr. Dowse talked about as CP1, right?
That's my understanding, yes.
He said it had the number ending 0114, correct?
Correct.
If we could take a look at Government 319, it's in evidence. Everybody can look at this one. You remember some testimony about this? It's a screenshot of a text message, right?
Yes.
The president wants to know if you called David Pecker again. Do you see that?
Yes.
At this trial, you're sort of the guardian of the toll records, right?
I don't know if I'd say that, but if you say so.
There are no toll records in evidence that reflect calls between Hope Hicks and David Pecker around this time period. Are there?
I don't think that's true, but I would have to look at the underlying records.
Do you know what they're marked?
It would be in either People's 400 or 401. Hope Hicks wasn't a part of the Verizon records, so it would be in 401.
And there's no call summary chart between the phone calls between Hope Hicks and David Pecker. Is that correct?
That's correct.
The last thing I want to talk about the Government Exhibit 247, which is in evidence. If you could bring that up, please. Zoom in as best we can. So this is that recording file off the physical device marked CP1, right?
Yes.
And you said based on the file name, there's that timestamp time field that it is dated September 6th, 2016.
Yes, that's the timestamp.
And then we looked at Government Exhibit 400 for a call that you said came in around this time?
Around the time that the recording ended.
And so if we could bring up Government Exhibit 400 with the Bates ending 2726, please. If we could ask the government to do this so we could have the right redactions. This can be for everybody. We can zoom in on rows 2691 and 92, please. Mr. Conroy asked you some questions about the second one, 26192, right?
Yes.
But the one above it, 26191, is related, correct?
It's the same call.
It's the call that goes to a voicemail, right?
The first one.
Objection.
Overruled.
26191 is a missed call that goes to a voicemail, reflected in 26192, correct?
That's not my understanding.
Were you here this morning when Mr. Dixon testified?
Yeah, can I explain?
I'm just going to ask you some questions.
Yes, I understand.
You can be questioned again by Mr. Conroy. You were here when he testified, correct?
Yes.
I asked him some questions on the feature call on the right.
Yes.
You see where it says VM?
Yes.
For voicemail?
Yes.
That's the way he explained it, correct?
Yes.
That's what he said?
Yes.
So this call then, the call reflected in 26192, according to Mr. Dixon's testimony, reflects a voicemail, does it not?
If that's what he said, I don't want to testify to something I'm not an expert in.
But you were here when he said VM means voicemail, right?
Yes.
If we could zoom out, please, just to get oriented. The 3 columns there, the right side, there's a field that says IMEI, right?
Yes.
If we could zoom in on the IMEI column of this whole page, please. You were here when Mr. Dixon said the IMEI is the number associated with the physical device itself, right?
Yes. I think you're blowing up the wrong column, but that is my understanding also. Sorry.
Thank you. Do we have the IMEI up now?
Yes.
So you were here when Mr. Dixon said this IMEI number is the number associated with the physical device itself, right?
Yes.
So this IMEI associated with the 2 calls, the missed call and the voicemail that we just talked about, ends 4,913, right?
That's correct.
You just reminded us, did you not, that the IMEI associated with the CP1 phone ends 4,731?
That's correct.
So it's a different device, right?
That's right.
So it's a voicemail, correct?
If you say so.
Well, it's...
Yes.
You were here when Mr. Dixon said it, right?
Yes.
So it's a voicemail to a different physical device than the one Mr. Dowse testified about, right?
To a different physical device, yes.
Nothing further, Judge.
Thank you. Any redirect?
Just a few questions. I just want to talk first about the summary charts that you did. All of the calls on those charts are in evidence in other places, is that right?
Yes.
Does that include the calls that Mr. Bove was talking about, that when we cut down on the charts, those calls are all still in evidence, correct?
Yes.
Why, if you know, why were those 9 exhibits shortened?
My understanding is that the decision was always going to be that we would admit the parts of the call summaries that were related to what had come out in trial. That's the point of doing summary charts. We're pretty far down the road now, so we made decisions about which parts of them to include.
And you were asked a couple of questions about the fact that you knew that the original summary charts had been turned over to the defense, is that right?
Yes.
And you know that the new versions had also been turned over to the defense, right?
That's correct.
And were you aware that there was no objection to those charts coming into evidence?
Yes.
If we could pull up what we were just looking at, the page from People's 400 with the Bates ending 2726, if we could pull up the same 2 lines we were just looking at, 26191 and 92, I believe earlier, or just a minute or 2 ago on cross-examination, there was something you wanted to explain about what you saw in this call that interrupted the call that's in evidence as 246. Can you explain that for us?
Sure. So, Mr. Bove, asked me if these were 2 related calls and if the first one was a missed call. My understanding is this was one call that had 2 legs. I'm not sure exactly where it went. But this is how AT&T reported a single call that hit multiple stop points through their system before being connected. That was the clarification.
Okay, if you know, do people sometimes get new phones and keep the same phone number?
I do.
Meaning you do get a new phone and keep the same phone number?
Yes.
I have nothing further, thank you.
Mr. Bove?
Yes, just briefly, if we could just bring that back up on the screen. The significance of this call is that the recording from the phone's CP1 cut off, right?
Correct.
Cuts off mid-conversation, correct?
I don't know if it cut off mid-conversation or at the end of the conversation.
It cuts off at some point in the conversation, right?
It ends.
Right. And it ends before the president is done speaking to Mr. Cohen, correct?
Objection.
Sustained.
You just gave, essentially, what is a hypothesis about these 2 calls on the screens, right?
I'm just describing the timestamps on the calls.
But you're not accounting for what's on the right side that says voicemail?
I don't think that's true. I apologize. I don't think I'm not accounting for it. I mean, the significance of the call is the timestamp.
Well, that's part of the significance. The other part is whether or not the phone call was actually answered.
Not necessarily. I'm not sure if the recording would have actually cut off whether it was answered or not. Could have been it just came in, cut off automatically. I don't know.
Right. You were here during Mr. Dowse's testimony, correct?
Yes.
You were here when I asked him You could not do any forensic analysis to determine the interplay between an incoming call and the voice recording data, right?
Objection.
Sustained.
You are aware the recording cuts off and that's why you were looking for a toll like this?
Yes.
Nothing further.
Anything else?
Nothing further.
Thank you, sir. You can step down.
This video was brought to you by my supporters on Indiegogo. YouTube will not monetize these videos, so I can only afford to keep making them with your support. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more like it, please donate to my Indiegogo campaign so we can finish this trial. You can find the campaign linked at the top of the description or scan the QR code on screen now.